Then he made a gesture across his throat and have him question my reason for existing. Because if you sleep with one of the players, and on the stairs, the club captain stopped me. Kate, why are you here? Do the job, do it well, and do it again tomorrow. I'm Kate Oram, and this is Lessons from the Touchline. So here's a question for you. Have you ever walked into a room and felt like everyone else had been handed a manual you never got? Like there was some unspoken rule that everyone knew except you, and the only way you were going to find out what it was by breaking it? Well, if you have, I want to tell you about a woman who didn't just feel that. She had someone physically trying to drag her out of a race because of it. And I promise by the end, you'll see exactly why I wanted to start there. So, 1967, the Boston Marathon. Now at this point, the Boston Marathon had never had an official female entrant, not because there was a rule specifically banning women, more that nobody had really tried. And the assumption was that women simply weren't capable of running that far. Enter Kathrine Switzer, a 20-year-old journalism student who registered using the name KV Switzer and lined up at the start with a bib number pinned to her front, 261. Now, for the first couple of miles, nobody noticed. She was running with her coach and her boyfriend tucked in among the pack, and it was all going rather well. Then a press truck came alongside, and the photographers spotted a woman running with an official number, and word got back to the race co-director, a man called Jock Semple. Semple leapt off that truck, sprinted up behind her, grabbed at her shoulders and tried to physically rip the bib off her back, screaming at her to get out of his race. Her boyfriend, who was also running, body-checked Semple clean off the course, and Switzer kept running. She finished the marathon. It took another 5 years before women were officially allowed to enter Boston at all. And here's what gets me about that story every time. She didn't need to win. She didn't need a personal best. The entire act of defiance was just finishing, just being visibly, undeniably there at the end, having done the thing everyone insisted she couldn't. Because sometimes the whole battle is just refusing to be pulled off the course. Now, I never had anyone physically try to rip a number off my back, thank goodness, but I want to tell you about the far quieter, far less photogenic version of exactly that experience, because it ran through almost my entire first season in a professional rugby club. There's a tradition, by the way, on pretty much every rugby team in the country that when a new player joins the squad on his first away trip, he has to stand up in front of everyone and sing something embarrassing. It's humiliating for about 5 minutes and then it's done permanently. You don't have to do it again, and he's in. Nobody questions his right to be there again. My husband went through that exact ritual when he joined the same club that I was at. He stood up, sang Bread of Heaven, I believe, and it sounded terrible the way he sang it, but he sat back down and that was that. Nobody asked him if he was sleeping with any of the players. Nobody questioned whether he was any good at his job. He was never under the kind of scrutiny that I was under, not once in the whole time he worked in sport. So I never got a song. I managed to dodge that bullet. I remember thinking I'd sing an Amy Winehouse song, but the layers of complexity of my song choice were too much to bear. But what I did get, what I got was a question. More than once, in more than one form, right from the very start. And I want to tell you about a couple of them. I should say before I go any further that this episode isn't only for women who are listening, and it's definitely not a poor old me story, but I was one of only 2 women who had day-to-day dealings with the players at my first club. I'm one of only 5 women who worked there at all. So if you've ever been the only one of something in a room full of everyone else, whatever that something is, I think this one will still mean something to you. And if you're a man listening who's never had to think about any of this, stick with me anyway, because it's genuinely useful, I think, to hear what a room looks like from the other side of it. So my first real taste of it came before I'd even got that job at the interview, and I sat down opposite the chief exec, desperate for the role, and one of the first things he asked me was whether I had a boyfriend. Now, I didn't at that point, but I had a fairly strong hunch about where the question was heading, so I said yes. Then he made a gesture across his throat and said something along the lines of, well, that's good because if you sleep with one of the players, and he didn't even need to finish the sentence for me to understand exactly what he meant. I smiled sweetly, nodded, and filed the moments under things I would apparently still be talking about years later on a podcast to you guys. I was so rattled by the whole exchange that when I went to meet the head coach a few days later, I actually brought a male friend along with me and I had him hover outside the building so that it would look to anyone watching like I actually had a boyfriend waiting for me. I mean, it's just ludicrous. I stage managed a completely fictional boyfriend to make myself seem more legitimate for a job I was totally qualified to do without one. I got the job. And within a matter of weeks, before I'd even really found my feet, that same question turned up again in a different form on my first away trip. Now, we travelled with the team to France. I could remember where we went. I hadn't been given a squad number, which meant nobody had thought to give me the branded kit bag that everyone else had, so I turned up dragging my own suitcase, sticking out like a sore thumb. I felt really uncomfortable. We settled into the hotel, had the evening meal, and I'd had about enough of standing slightly apart from everyone else. Everyone else was in full head-to-toe branded kit, except me. So I went up to my room, and on the stairs, the club captain stopped me, and he said, "Kate, why are you here?" And for a second, I genuinely didn't understand the question. I thought maybe he meant, why was I on the stairs? Or like, why was I going up to my bedroom? It was too early or something. But he said it again. And then he added, "Here in France," to the end of it. And then told me the other press officers don't travel with the team. That wasn't true, and I knew it wasn't, because my predecessor had travelled with the team, and who else would have written the match reports or run the press conferences, etc., etc. But it didn't really matter, because that wasn't the actual question, really, that he was asking. What he was really asking underneath it was, what was a woman doing on a trip full of men, and did I have an ulterior motive for being there? I think I replied something to the effect that I was just doing what I thought the job entailed. I had to travel to all the matches. Who would do my job if I didn't? It was absurd, really, to even think that I wouldn't travel. But there it was, a huge assumption, and purely because I was female. And I went up to my room, and I did cry, because I respected that player immensely, more than almost anyone I ever worked with in my whole rugby career. And have him question my reason for existing in that hotel, on that trip, in that job, when I was barely a few weeks in, was one of the most humiliating moments I'd experienced. But here's what I took from both of those moments, and it's stayed with me ever since. And I think it's the same thing Switzer figured out somewhere around mile 2 of the marathon. As a woman, I was going to have to work 100% harder than any man just to prove I had a right to be there in the first place. And whatever they decided to throw at me after that, I was just going to have to let it run off my back, because I wasn't going to let anyone make me feel that small and that insulted again. And that's exactly what I did. I put my head down and I got on with the job properly, thoroughly, and I kept doing it week after week for the rest of the season and several more after that. And not because I owed anyone an explanation, but because I'd decided I was going to prove I was the best at my job, whatever reason they thought I had for being there, until eventually they'd rely on me for it. So here's what I'd like you to take from this. Whatever room you're walking into today, if you've ever had to answer a question nobody would think to ask someone else, or work twice as hard just to earn the same starting position everybody else was handed automatically, this one's for you. You don't owe anyone an explanation for taking up the space you've earned. Do the job, do it well, and do it again tomorrow, and let it run off your back when it needs to. Because eventually your work answers the question so thoroughly that nobody thinks to ask it twice. You don't need to win. Sometimes you just need to finish the race. That's it for this episode of Lessons from the Touchline. Thank you for being here. I'm Kate Oram. Find me on Spotify and come and say hello over on Substack. I will see you next week.